this a losing battle to try to completely control the passionate innovators. And if you do, and you succeed to truly stifle them, then you'll lose them, and then that's not good either.
Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. My guests today are Tom Davenport and Ian Barkin. Tom is the President's Distinguished Professor of Information Technology and Management at Babson College, the co-founder of the International Institute for Analytics, a fellow of the MIT Initiative for the Digital Economy, and a senior advisor to Deloitte Analytics. He's written or edited more than 20 books. Ian is the co-founder of 2B Ventures, a venture capital company that develops the tools, talent, and outcomes that shape the future of work. He's an entrepreneur and an innovator, and he co-founded Symphony Ventures, a pioneer in robotic process automation, or RPA, which was acquired in 2018. Ian's LinkedIn learning courses and writing have introduced millions to RPA, intelligent automation, and conversational AI. Tom and Ian have a new book, All Hands on Tech, the AI-powered citizen revolution, published by Wiley Press in October of 2024. I look forward to covering a number of the themes from across the book through this conversation. Ian Barkin, Tom Davenport, welcome to Technovation. It's great to speak with you today.
Happy to be here.
Great to be here.
Full disclosure here, Ian and Tom are friends of mine from different walks of my life, at least, and I'm so delighted to have a conversation with each of them together, especially as it's on the heels of the release of a terrific contribution to one's intellectual diet, All Hands on Tech, the AI-powered citizen revolution. Congratulations to you both on this. And Tom, maybe I'll begin with you. The central concept of the book is citizen development. And I think it's a concept that would be familiar to most who would be watching or listening to this, but just to be comprehensive here and also to get your lens to it, can you describe what it entails and how it's evolved and why it is deserving of the centerpiece of a book like this one?
Sure, happy to. First, I should say it has nothing to do with voting. People may be thinking about this time of year. It is really the democratization of information technology capability. And, for I think all of the history of information technology, we felt like we needed information technology professionals to develop information technology products, be they applications or websites or automations or data science models or whatever. And over time, the people have become more capable in this regard. We all are carrying around data center level capabilities from 20 years ago or so in our pockets and having to navigate through various applications in order to live our lives. And at the same time that we're getting more capable, the technology is getting easier to use. Generative AI being the kind of primary example, but we saw previous versions of that with low-code, no-code software, and in the whole data science area, this idea of automated machine learning. But generative AI, I think, makes it possible to write code and specify, if you can specify what you want, pretty much, if not today, in a very short time, you'll be able to get the outcome that you want from a technology perspective. Develop a website for me that does this, develop an application that does this, develop a machine learning model that does this, and voila, it's there.
Very good context setting there, Tom. And Ian, I'd love for you to take it from there if you would. Your book highlights the fact that this is an important ingredient for digital transformation, a concept certainly in the minds, on the lips, and in the actions of so many organizations, encompassing citizen development, citizen automation, application development, and data science as ingredients to citizen development. Talk a little bit about, from your perspective, and as somebody who's been a practitioner leveraging this in a variety of different settings, your own perspective.
Sure. As Tom said, there's been this sort of direction of travel of technology getting sort of more human, if you will, and humans becoming slightly more comfortable with technology. And as you noted, my last decade has been spent working with enterprises to look at how to emulate the work people have done and digitize it. And the primary tool set there was something we called robotic process automation, the aperture opened up and we included other technologies under an intelligent automation umbrella that included document reading and interpretation and some workflow and identification of opportunities to transform processes, and then the RPA digitization. Um, the narrative 10 years ago was this was easy enough a business analyst could do it. Unfortunately, a lot of that narrative was sales driven. And so the incentive was clear that they wanted to make it sound like it was that easy, but it never really was, right? Because to Tom's point, you still needed professionals. You needed professionals to give you the environment in which to play with. You needed professionals to give you the governance and guardrails, to give you the access, giving everything else. Um, it has so the promise was there, but the execution struggled. And so I would imagine many of your listeners, when they hear the concept citizen development, they probably roll their eyes and say, yeah, that failed. That created a bunch of technical debt, a whole bunch of gray IT or shadow IT. We shut that down hard. And it was a liability, not an asset to the enterprise. But our assertion is it's happening whether you want it to or not. And so for your audience, the opportunity now presents itself to enable it, safeguard, guardrail, guidance, governance of it, but to enable the grassroots innovation and creativity that exists in every nook and cranny of an enterprise that is blossoming whether you want it to or not. So you can try to snuff it out or you can take advantage of it.
Staying with you for a moment longer, Ian, you're referencing the fact that in essence this is inevitable. This is something because it has grassroots momentum to it. Whether the people at the top want to squelch this, view it as shadow IT, and want to shine a light on things to get people out of the shadows, this is going to happen. Talk a bit more about why that's the case.
Right. Well, so for some reason, we give steroids a lot of credit in the evolution of enterprise IT. And so when I was in the RPA space, we would call it macros on steroids. And then we called everything else the prior version of itself on steroids. And Gen AI is all those prior things on steroids. But the ultimate point was
I say it's on LSD, actually.
okay. Generational thing, I guess. Less rage, maybe. I don't know. Is that, but the underlying reality in all of those stories was effectively people building and access databases and Excel building macros were practitioners, domain experts who were just trying to get a job done. And if they brought not only their sort of knowledge of their space to work every day, but they brought a personality type and a tenacity and a mindset that said, darn it, this can be done differently and better. This is a huge pain in my rear. It's such a waste of time, or this is spaghetti system, whatever it is, whatever the tension, whatever the friction, whatever the pain was, you have people who see that there's a better way and have the conviction to go about trying to create that better way. And so, like, would you ever want to squash that? I mean, do you run an enterprise based purely on compliant automaton? And if so, then okay, well that might work. But there is inspiration and creativity in every component of a business, and it's gotten easier and easier for them to turn their ideas into actions. And we would argue you have to understand that and respect it and then safely nurture and guide it so it doesn't turn into shadow IT and technical debt and risk.
Really interesting points you raised there, Ian. And Tom, maybe I'd love to ask you, as somebody who's worked for a long time with IT organizations, the shadow IT has always been a pejorative, but it was also technologists that were on the other end of that, or that were in the shadows themselves. And so where it was sussed out, it was the technologists who were on the other end, the people with engineering, computer science degrees, and so on. What we're talking about here is a proliferation of technology work well beyond where the traditional shadow IT has lurked, so to say, which in some ways I think is much more intimidating, frankly. There's a lot more people now that are getting involved. On the one hand, there's a pro to this, perhaps. The optimist might say, well, that means everyone is leaning towards technology, which is a great thing for a CIO, DOTO, whoever runs a technology and digital organization within a large enterprise. The cynic, of course, would say now there's just so much more to get our arms around that it perhaps it's an impossible task to do so. And so talk a little bit about your own perspective. Is there comfort you can provide to the person who runs tech and digital, or are we heading down a path that is beyond their grasp, so to say?
Well, I think it could be both. First of all, I think as a source of comfort, we looked really hard for disaster stories from citizen development, and we didn't really find any. I think we kicked around one that happened in the early days of robotic process automation involving telecom companies sending out too many iPhones, but that was a long time ago and they fixed it pretty quickly. So it's not really that dangerous in terms of what we've seen thus far. And secondly, I think if you manage it well, you can restrict it to situations that are least likely to get the organization into big trouble. And a lot of companies that have embraced this have done the sort of red, yellow, green oriented approach, or red, amber, green if they're based out in the UK. And the green applications are those that don't affect too many people and that even if they stopped working would not bring the business to its knees. The red ones are those that would bring the business to its knees if they stopped working or use really important, highly regulated data or something like that. And those are generally forbidden by the organizations that kind of have that three-part structure. And then the yellow ones, they may be allowed to exist, but with some controls, or maybe IT has a little bit more involvement in the process. And that's one thing that we haven't talked about. We've had, for as long as I've been around IT organizations, there's been this sort of cultural gap between business users and business stakeholders and IT people, and they don't understand each other and they badmouth each other, and neither is really happy with the combination. But I think tools that can easily create a prototype, for example, that IT could turn into something more bulletproof, could ease that problem considerably. I think Gartner's called it fusion teams, and I think citizen-oriented tools can really make that much more feasible.
Well, and you both have introduced a framework. You refer to it as the 4G framework of Genesis, governance, guidance, and guardrails to help organizations, along with what you've described as well. Tom, maybe sticking with you for a moment longer, can you define those four for us and talk a little bit about the progression that is suggested by them?
Sure. Well, I'll at least start with Genesis, since I think that one was my idea, but the other three were Ian's idea, so maybe he can take them over at
Perfect.
some point. But Genesis is how you get started with this effort, and you can let 1,000 flowers bloom and not really oversee it very much, or you can be much more intentional about who do you get involved in this and how do you encourage them. And in general, we think this is an activity that should be done by volunteers. People shouldn't be pressed into citizen development service if they don't want to. But the idea of telling people that this is available and marketing it as a concept around the organization and showing them what success looks like are all, I think, activities that would reasonably be accomplished through the approach you take to Genesis. We did see some organizations, I think Amtrak is one example, where citizen development really took off only because one person and his manager thought it was a good idea and they started doing it, and it eventually became pretty viral. But I think it's better if it's planned, and our poster child for that is Shell, where the CIO said this is really important for us to be able to digitize at the pace we want, and we're going to kind of orchestrate all these different components of what they call the DIY movement.
I would add that the Genesis concept, to some degree, also explores the fact that while you, as an executive and leader in your organization, go about trying to figure out how to launch and introduce and start this, our assertion is it's already started. So, job done. And so then it's really up to you to decide whether you let it continue to those thousand flowers bloom, or you try to squash it. And good luck squashing it, right? Just because it's there. Um, and then to the other three G's, the governance, guardrails, and guidance. Governance was just us making sure that we weren't, looking through rose-colored glasses at this and thinking it was so easy and it was going to be magical. Like, this takes hard work. It does require that IT be involved. As Tom mentioned, there were these different frameworks that often would measure sort of criticality and complexity of these solutions. And we heard some folks talk about the me and the we of, if it's a solution that helps me, go for it, right? Knock yourself out. Just use, and that's kind of the sort of the macro idea, or even now the Gen AI sort of thing of just go ahead, use ChatGPT to write you better emails or to build you better data models, et cetera. But as soon as it encroaches onto the we, and as soon as it starts touching other systems or other departments or other companies, that's when we need a shared service involved. So either a center of excellence that comes in with IT as a strong leader there, or it sort of kicks up to IT, says, thanks, Pete, for the idea. That's great. We'll pick it up from here, or we'll let you continue to be involved. But there's a lot of complexity here around data security and compliance and other stuff that we need to keep an eye on. So that was governance. Guardrails, similarly, is effectively more of the sort of automated safeguards to make sure that people aren't sort of tapping into data and launching your IP onto the dark web just because they found a way to tap into all of that.
Bowling is my favorite term
Which
for
one?
that. It sort of keeps you out of the gutters without you having to worry too much about it.
That's right. So the big balloons in the gutters, and then guardrails was a fun one because ultimately it spoke to, and as Tom mentioned, an Amtrak. He didn't use a great analogy, but once it started in Amtrak, that train had left the station. But and ultimately, in a lot of the organizations we found, there was an enthusiasm around what the art of the possible was once people saw that I can have some sort of effect and impact on this friction that I've faced. How exciting. And so Shell did call it DIY. Other people's called it creators or makers or super SMEs. I mean, ultimately, it was given different names, but the idea was you can do this, but the guidance element was, are there coaches and structure and education and even internal communications, like just brown bag lunches where you share best practices and ideas across different teams? Because let's be honest, in large organizations, everyone's facing similar or the same problems. And so your creativity over in one department may have just solved a big problem for us over in ours. And so that's what we saw in some of the most mature and advanced citizen programs. And so we brought that into the framework as well.
Really interesting. I appreciate that breakdown of that. And Ian, staying with you a moment longer, each of you have mentioned the Amtrak example. I want to delve more deeply into that if we could, and tell the story of Michael McCullough, the solitary citizen developer who really sparked a movement as I read it, and really interesting example. Describe that, and then to what extent do you see that as potentially more broadly applicable to other Michael McCulloughs out there?
Right. We came across a few real sort of individual sparks and stars, and it made us actually evaluate sort of what makes for a citizen. Because not necessarily just that they've got the domain expertise of the space that they're in and that they know enough about the technology, like they can work with a Microsoft Power Platform, for instance, or what have you. And that was one of the common ones we found. But they just had that sort of personality trait and tenacity where they just wanted to roll sleeves up and solve problems. And sometimes solve problems in the face of internal adversity where people said, "Hey, you really shouldn't be doing this." And they say, well, be damned, I'm going to do it. And so he's a great example of someone who had real strong vision. He also had, which was another key point that we examine and explore, he had some really strong air cover from an executive sponsor who ultimately kept him out of trouble. And there was, I won't say which enterprises these were, but this story sparks this memory, is there were a few enterprises where the CTO, CIO woke up one day, looked around their organization and went, what the heck is happening? Why is everyone developing these things on their computers, on their platform? And someone had to alert them to the fact that the Microsoft 365 license they just signed up for gave everyone Copilot. And so, sort of inadvertently, they had effectively welcomed in citizen development into their organization, and then they had to wrap their head around what they do next. And so, some of this was that it was the makeup of a person who had ingenuity and just the wherewithal to do it, the get up and go, and then the air cover, and the fact that the enterprise had, in fact, turned on this ability for him to design and build.
Yeah, super interesting. And I love the notion, the importance of that air cover for somebody to have the confidence to proceed accordingly and set this template or example that others might follow. Really powerful example. Tom, you alluded to the Shell example. You both did again as well, and this DIY approach that they took. I wonder if you can kind of unpack that a little bit further as exemplary of what others might choose to follow in learning the lessons of the book.
Sure. I mean, I'm sure there were citizen development types around Shell for a while, given that they have so many engineers and so on. But at one point, 7 or 8 years ago, the group CIO, Jay Crott, he said, we have to digitize this company and we just can't do it as the IT organization alone. We don't have enough resources. We have a lot of smart people. They're already starting to use data to do fairly significant things. So, A, we have to get the data right to make sure that they're using it effectively. And they did that with a cloud initiative that was quite successful, moving data that would be accessible to the cloud and telling people what was there and so on. And then let's also start this DIY initiative. And he put somebody in charge of it and he gave them a budget, and that person started to hire some people, and it really, really took off. We think they were the developers of this red, amber, green framework. A lot of people are advocating it now, but we think they came up with it initially. And they're now on, I think, the second generation of leaders of it. They have several thousand people who are doing it. They have 30 or 40 coaches around the company. They've transformed the work lives of some people. We profiled this guy, Stevie Sims, who said, I was turning valves for a living in a refinery, and now he's a DIY coach for his part of the business. And it's just been quite successful. As Jay Crott says, they've hit a lot of singles. Probably wouldn't have said that if he were Dutch or English, but he's American originally. And so there is that question of how much value are you getting if you're hitting a lot of singles. It adds up, but we think there are also ways that you can, do doubles and triples and home runs with this approach if you set it up in the right way.
Yeah, well, singles can get people around the bases, certainly. Ian, we've already mentioned fusion teams, and I know there's a case example from Wolters Kluwer in the book as well that talks a bit about the combination of domain experts and data scientists and the power of bringing people together with a variety of different intellectual disciplines. Can you talk a bit about that case example and the concept of fusion teams and its applicability to the ideas in the book as well?
Sure. I'll speak more broadly, and then Tom is going to correct me on the specific example because he did more of that research. But the historically, right, we all in our professional careers have contended with the oil and water realities of business and IT. They've never communicated well. Frameworks have always been over egged and overstructured, and they just didn't speak the same language. And so that's always constrained collaborative innovation. Ultimately, if I'm a business user and I have an idea and I know what I need, IT knows better, and you actually want this other thing, or it's a different tool, or let's put it in the roadmap, but we're really busy doing this mega ERP implementation that's supposed to take 3 years and ultimately take 7. Those sorts of realities, right? And that was what drove, I think, the excitement around the RPA space 10 years ago, was all of a sudden these business users had an option, frankly, a chance to do something because they were just sitting there being told that they were going to have to get in line and wait. The other challenge was just the vocabulary. These two groups didn't really know how to speak to each other, and they didn't have the experience, life experiences, work experiences to be able to relate to each other. And the feedback that we heard was as a result of humans becoming a little bit more technically savvy and technology becoming more human, there was this converging where in some of these strategy and ideation sessions, there were leaders we spoke to who said that they couldn't tell who was on which team in the meeting. They couldn't tell if someone was a data scientist or an HR transactional professional because just more comfortable with each other's language. And that's huge, right? Just because if that brings you together and you're able to share and co-innovate and collaborate and at least even prototype, hey, this is the sort of thing that I'd love to have, and I kind of ginned it up in this tool and it looks like that. Someone can pick it up and run with it or just secure it and turn it live. And so that's what's happening in these centers of excellence is that fusion is made possible both because of that inflection point of the humans and the technology, and also because of just the life experiences and the language that are bringing people closer together, which is really, really exciting because that's only going to continue to overlap more and give more and more domain experts the chance to turn ideas into actions, either by themselves or with a team if given the support.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say in the Wolters Kluwer case, they kind of got around that oil and water culture issue by creating this intermediary organization. Oddly, it had the letter CIO in it, the CIOX, I think they called it. It didn't stand for Chief Information Officer, but having an intermediary organization that didn't really have those cultural issues between users and professional developers was one thing. And then also, I know you've done some work in this area, Peter. They had a very strong product orientation in this group. And when your goal is to create a product for external customers or internal ones, but in this case at Wolters Kluwer, it was external kind of information oriented products, people tend to, get with a program or and say, I'll do whatever I can to add to this. And you don't have data scientists who say, oh, it's just my job to create some algorithms, or IT people saying, come back in a couple of years and I'll have this for you. This is the way the business succeeds. And they have had a number of successful products with this kind of boundary crossing that Ian was mentioning, where people would engage in saying what the technology needs to do, maybe develop a prototype of it themselves, show it to more professional developers to take it to the next level, maybe do a little bit of data science modeling, show that to professional data scientists that really do whatever was necessary to create successful solutions for customers.
Yeah. And it's interesting. Gosh, I was hoping you were going to have like an American football analogy for yet another Dutch team, Dutch company there, but we'll let that pass with, but it seems like as I think across this conversation and certainly through the read of your book, so much of what you're describing is the necessity and frankly the power of collaboration with unusual bedfellows, bringing together at the intersection of technology and fill in the blank other disciplines. And frankly, in some ways, it's kind of the continuation of agile practices of incorporating end users through the iterations of the development of the product operating model, which you just referenced, and bringing together people with a variety of different skill sets more permanently to advance things and innovate. Topics even like DevSecOps, which take typical disciplines and throw where one used to throw ideas over the transom to others to then react to, and actually bringing those people earlier on into the development process so that there's no transom to throw anything over. You're all in the same room from the get-go. So in many ways, I see your ideas as the latest iteration, the next peak of a series of ideas that have led to this, which are encouraging this sort of collaboration in unusual ways. Ian, am I getting that right? Do you buy that as a logic?
No, it's wrong, Peter. We developed these ideas entirely from scratch and didn't draw from anything that's ever happened before.
Yeah. I do have to give Tom, and we came up with this all on our own. We didn't stand on the shoulders of anyone. No, that's absolutely right. I mean, and again, these frameworks were developed because you had to try to figure out how to fill gaps with just structure. take Agile and these customer stories that you would have to write to tell a team, okay, imagine if you will, a human in our HR shared service department has to hire a new human to the team and they have to enter information into 7 different systems and they just say, okay, I kind of get it. Whereas instead, here's Janet who does that and she's literally been thinking through this and it's a whole lot easier for her to articulate the data model and structure of a new employee. I need this from them and this is a way to automate it, and I've taken a crack at some of it, and that accelerates it because your team lives it. They're in those trenches. We wrote a few articles that preceded this book that informed it, and one of them, the title was around grassroots automation and innovation, and that idea that this does allow these ideas to percolate up from the people who understand whatever the process is and whomever the customer is the best. And this just further enables them to engage with, if they need to, the professional IT to really codify it and structure it. But at the same time, everybody's starting to get Copilot. And if the company has allowed them some access to other Gen AI tools, there's a lot that these creative individuals can start to tinker with and build on their own.
Yeah, I think there's certain industries where this is really happening, and they don't even call it anything related to citizen development or citizen data science. It's just what they're doing in pharmaceuticals, for example, where they hire these incredibly smart people, in some cases MD, PhDs, and they've all had to do, for example, data science work in their research and to say, well, sorry, we're not going to let you develop data science models. That's going to be the professional data scientists who do that. That would be really stupid because they know the kinds of analyses they want to do. They have the tools. You can generate a machine learning model now with a few prompts into generative AI, or at the worst, an automated machine learning software tool. I think that really is enabling innovation to happen much faster and more successfully when you have those kinds of people. And I think companies like Shell, it was these engineers. Jay Krotz said, they're all learning Python in school. We can't hardly say don't use it after you get to your job here.
There was a big sort of retention and motivation component to it of just giving people any sort of autonomy over their own existence and reality to make it better, just because there's a lot of room. And I mean, you get no points for understanding that digital transformation is an imperative to survive, and software is eating every enterprise, and you need to bring that to bear. And no enterprise has the bandwidth or the budget to be able to execute across all of the wish list items. So the only way to stand any sort of chance of advancing in those areas is to, tap all hands and allow them to be on tech. And that's up to technical leadership and executives across the board to understand that, realize it's already happening, and give these citizens a safe space to do this development.
What are you seeing? Are you still hearing people in those roles disparaging shadow IT? Or are they saying, geez, we've got all these smart people, we need to figure out how to make them more productive and effective with technology?
I think you're right. And I hope my earlier question about this being, your book being kind of the next version of collaborations that a lot of companies are already fostering, I think it's all the more reason for people to read this book and hopefully build upon what they already have in place in many cases to add broader value. I would say, I mean, Tom, you brought up the example of the pharma companies. I think there's certain industries that have embraced this more rapidly, where you have a preponderance of or I should say you have a distribution of tech talent or tech topics across the organization. One thinks of financial services as another industry where there's a lot of that. It's not just the IT department that has the technical staff. Of course, Silicon Valley organizations, it's even more so, where everyone across the organization has remarkable tech acumen and is employing it in various ways, irrespective of what the specific IT department has to say. And therefore, IT organizations need to operate in this new reality. In many ways, actually, there's I think parallels or lessons for non-tech centric organizations from the tech world in terms of how CIOs, or however they're titled, the person who runs tech and digital, exerts his or her influence, and the team does the same in order to drive value. Since, oftentimes they're surrounded by people who think that they could do the CIO's job in their, after hours if they needed to, because of their, how remarkable they are in the world of technology. So absolutely, I think we're seeing a lot of this, but as with anything, people are in varying rungs of the ladder from a maturity perspective, and certainly your contribution through this book will help more of them, I think, rise up to a greater level of maturity, rise the rungs of that ladder to the appropriate place.
We did find some objectors and places where IT is still sort of stifling progress in this space, and in some cases, they wouldn't let us use their names for that reason.
And I wouldn't be surprised, and forgive me, you did the research and you'll correct me, I hope, where I've got this wrong, but I think especially in those organizations where the preponderance of tech talent is within IT, and therefore they enjoy the difference that department has relative to others, the unique expertise that they have, the thought of this being disseminated more broadly. It is in fact a risk, but the risk seems so acute that they don't want to open up the work of technology to others, perhaps in ways that the dynamics of companies in the industries we've already mentioned are being forced to do so just by virtue of how much more disseminated that talent is.
I'm in the status of IT to have the stranglehold over anything that is technical. But the problem is you can't put your finger in this dam and stop this, right? Because inadvertently you turned on the superpower when you got an Office 365 license, or because there are just more and more powerful agents being added to AI agents being added to every single platform and technology tool you already have in the operation. People are going to be bringing ideas to work, and frustration with current frictions. That is inevitable. And standing in the way of it, again, that just gets you sort of bowled over. There's a losing battle to try
Yeah.
to completely control the passionate innovators. And if you do, and you succeed to truly stifle them, then you'll lose them. And then that's not good either.
As they did at Home Depot, for example, with Charles Coleman, who was made Employee of the Year and given, he can't remember whether it was a $50 or a
15, yeah.
$500 gift certificate at Home Depot. But that was the recognition he did for saving them literally $1 billion, or making $1 billion more revenue through his citizen data science activities. And he said, forget it, I'm out of here.
Wow.
And one of the things we touch on, which we didn't see given enough sort of focus in anything that we read prior in celebrating this concept, was the importance of incentives and understanding how to reward that sort of behavior. Because if you don't, you'll have savvy people who automate a good chunk of their job and then go get another one as well. And so there's this entire subculture of people who revel in J2 and J3, job 2, job 3, because they can just digitize what they do, and their managers don't know that they're automating it. And why would they ever tell them? Because, a second salary versus $50 gift certificate, really easy to do that math.
Yeah, great points. We've talked about the fact that these ideas are propelled forward given advancements in artificial intelligence, Gen AI more specifically, automation more generally, especially as we think about the rapid innovation in those areas. How do you see this continuing to evolve? Not that we can fully predict, of course, where those innovations are likely to take place, but as we sit here today, how do you see these ideas continuing to play forward, given the fact that it's happening in concert with some of these world-changing innovations? Ian, maybe I'll turn to you first.
Yeah, you said it at the right time for us. The Jensen Huang, the NVIDIA CEO, who basically made the point that he would tell his kids not to go get a degree in coding anymore, because you just need natural language and domain expertise to be building anything in software. And Sam Altman, at about the same time, made the same declaration, and that helped us very much. And so that's why their organization should buy thousands of copies of this book. But the point is, again, tech becoming more human, it really does. It is becoming easy enough to just narrate your need and dictate your ideas. And whether it's tools like zero.dev or Replit or any number of other Gen AI tools that seem to be proliferating faster than I can track them. It's head spinning, but those are enabling people to build and put live and run apps and applications and maps and models. And so if you think you've got any chance, again, I keep coming back to this theme. I suppose it's because of your audience, but this is a huge threat if seen through that lens, and a tremendous opportunity if handled with the responsibility of understanding your new job is not just to be head of IT, but to be a shepherd and a champion of grassroots innovation and creating an enablement structure that allows these folks, if they so present interest, right? Not everyone, as Tom said, not everyone should be sort of force marched into being innovative. They just don't want to be. It's not their thing. But there are enough of them that you should enable them.
Yeah, Tom, I wanted to actually, building on Ian's great insights, as an educator and somebody who's been affiliated with numerous world-beating universities, how do you think this will impact how technical disciplines are taught, or for that matter, opportunities for those who don't choose STEM degrees to get into technology fields?
Yeah, well, this is very relevant to what I'm thinking about now relative to my primary employer, which is Babson College. We are the #1 school for entrepreneurship in US News and World Report rankings for 31 straight years. And Ian and I, in the course of our research, discovered that a lot of entrepreneurs are thinking about using these tools to, develop everything they need for their businesses, their website, the transaction systems, any data analysis they need to do. And there are programs that will help them learn the tools in order to do that. And then learning about all the capabilities available in Power Platform, for example. It made me think that if we're training entrepreneurs at Babson, it's really a bit of educational malpractice not to give them these capabilities, familiarize them with all the tools that they need to develop new businesses. And, we're doing it, we're training them in AI. We haven't gotten around yet to making Power Platform necessary for every student, but I suspect it will happen at some point. And making it easier to develop new businesses. Hey, it's part of the opportunity economy, as somebody once said.
Well, and what's so extraordinary is that the traditional model was you needed one tech co-founder, at least. There had to be one real geeky person who you just didn't let out of the basement, and then somebody else who spent more time on the fundraising and the marketing. Well, the tech geeks are incredibly valuable. You don't necessarily need that co-founder dynamic anymore. And then the other one is you spent a lot of your time just putting together a pitch deck and a business plan that had all sorts of, like, if we could get 1% of the total addressable market in here. Now you just prototype and let it go live in the market and see if it works. Like, oh, that didn't, let's tweak it. Okay, 15 minutes later, oh, that one caught a little bit more traction. You can iterate so much more rapidly and without a technical background. As Tom had mentioned, there's this one individual, Christian Peverelli, that we profile, who has this YouTube community he calls We Are No Code. And it's effectively a course. It's a bunch of cool YouTube videos that allow him to help other aspiring entrepreneurs to turn ideas into startups. And there are so many more like him.
I can't remember who it was, a venture capitalist, I think, who made the prediction that there will one day be, maybe one day not too far off, a company that has $1 billion valuation with a single employee.
Yeah, that's Altman. And
was that Sam? Okay, got it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's for effect. I mean, I hope we never get to that point. That's a sad existence, to be a solo entrepreneur that celebrates by himself as he IPOs. But obviously the concept is there of you just don't need the same sort of large team of specialists that do all the different elements of a startup, because it's so much easier to do some of the hardest things with the newer, modern, easier to use tool set.
Well, Tom Davenport, Ian Barkin, thank you so much for a terrific conversation. Thank you also for a terrific contribution to the dialogue through your book, All Hands on Tech, the AI-powered citizen revolution. Certainly recommend it to all who are listening or watching. And as always, wonderful to spend time with you both. Thank you so much for taking a little time with me and with this audience.
Thank you.
Our pleasure. Thank you. Yeah.